Welcome to From Our Generation, where we uncover the ideas and events that shape the world we live in today. I'm Crom Carmichael.
And I'm Mike Hassel.
Together we'll explore the past to better understand the present, because history isn't just about what happened, it's about how you think about it. All right, well, Michael, it is February 20th, 2026.
It is.
And in the last couple of podcasts, we've really been talking about investing, thinking about a long-term plan for average people.
How to build wealth.
How to build wealth and what that means. And we're going to be doing more of that. But today what I thought we would do is I thought we'd go back and we would once again kind of go back to core principles. First values, first principles, whatever you want to call them. Mm-hmm. And you and I personally, we've talked about this for years. And so I said there are 5 pillars of prosperity. And I say this because each one of these pillars of prosperity, they're linked together, but they don't stand completely alone, but they are different from the other 4. But each one is a key. It's like thinking about a table with 4 legs, or in this case, it's going to be a table with 5 legs, and that if any leg is weakened, the whole structure is weakened.
Okay.
And if one leg is really weakened, then the whole structure is really weakened. And so in prosperity, there are 5 basic things that we look at that determine whether or not a country is going to. These are the things that have to be in place for the circumstances for prosperity.
Okay.
We talked about those on the island, about innovation, what types of things have to be in place for there to be innovation, and that innovation is the key to people being able to produce more in the same amount of time.
So any of our listeners who don't understand the reference to an island, the very first episodes of this podcast.
Very first two episodes.
Okay, 2 were about a fictional island where you start a simple economy.
Right.
And a lot of these principles are revealed by just looking at the way that a simple economy would have to be started and grown.
Right. And so, for example, on the island, the first chapter was about one person on an island and having to work 16 hours a day, 7 days a week to survive.
Right.
And we call that the lowest possible standard of living a human could have. And then the second part was the island had 10 people. And after a while, the 10 people figured out that if they cooperated with each other and specialized,
yes,
that they could as a group,
be more productive.
They could produce the same amount in less time.
Yes.
And so therefore, their standard of living was now higher because they were working less and had the same amount.
Yes.
And then we talked about through innovation on the island, some people who were the innovators then became wealthier than the others because they took their extra time and invested that in an innovation.
Yeah, and that led to discussions of property. Are you going to get an innovation if people don't own it?
Right.
If they're forced to dilute it and share it with everybody, why do it? Because you're no better off.
Right. And the nature at that point between coupling the innovator with the person who has the capital, right, and the implications of that. So we would encourage people who hear what we're going to talk about today, who have not listened to the
episodes 1 and 2.
Episodes 1 and 2. If they've not listened to them at all, we really encourage them to go do it. If they haven't listened to them in months, then we encourage them to go back and listen again because those 2 episodes are truly foundational.
Yes.
So in this episode, I want to lay out the 5 pillars, those 5 legs of the table that on which prosperity either rises or it falls from any given point in time.
Okay.
And those 5 are generally low taxes, sensible regulation, low corruption at a general level, not just government, but low corruption in the private sector also, sound money, meaning that the value of the dollar, low inflation, in other words, sound money. And then the last one, and this one's one you and I have bounced around as the best way to describe it, and that is that we pass laws that are designed to treat everybody equally under that law. Everybody equally under that law.
Right.
So when we say equal treatment under the law, if you say just that, then government could pass a law that separates people from each other and still apply the law equally.
Yes.
And so now what we're saying is that to the extent possible, and especially when it comes to anything that's economic in nature, you want the laws to be designed so that everybody's equal under the law. And that one is a big one. And we're going to get to some instances where we have violated that principle. And it is the violation of that principle that I believe has led to the separation between the very wealthy and everybody else. And when I say the very wealthy, I'm talking about really the top 1%. I could talk about the top 10%, but I'm certainly saying that the top 20% are very separated from the other 80% because of public policy.
There's a couple of observations about this list I would like to make. It seems to me the first three of these, low taxes, sound regulation, and low corruption, really are associated in general with limited government.
Yes.
If you categorize those together, as you've said, they're each have their own effect, and we'll deal with them independently. But you can categorize that, I think, in the way that our founders would have done. They wanted limited government because it brings about limited taxes that are closest to the people as opposed to being imposed from afar by people who don't know you and don't know your circumstances as well. And corruption, I think, grows the bigger institutions you have, whether it's government or business. It's easier to hide and manipulate. The sound money, I think, applies to either limited government or large government. You need sound money, and what does that mean?
One is easier to have sound money than the other.
Yeah.
So when you look at these three, you can have, I think the way that you're describing it now is when we think of the national government. And actually, when I think of those three, I really think that the best way for us to talk about it with our listeners is not just the federal government, but to compare the state governments against each other and ask, do the ones who have low taxes, sensible regulation, and low corruption within the states, are they more affordable?
People moving there or moving away?
And are they more affordable? Are people's standard of living in those states generally going up at a faster rate than the other states?
Yeah.
And that's a good point of comparison.
Right.
One of the things that the Founding Fathers said is that they acknowledged that they didn't know what the best way to govern was. They knew that. And so when they said, we're going to design a constitution, we're going to draft a constitution that empowers a national government but then limits those powers. And then the power the national government doesn't have, all of those powers will be given to the states. And the states can then look at how each state is doing and adjust its policies if it wants to then try to emulate the states that are more prosperous.
So it's like a giant laboratory.
Exactly.
It's called the laboratory of democracy and names like that. But I think it's a reliable indicator to remember that people vote with their feet. And if you look where people are leaving, you look where people are going, that's a strong indicator of what's working better for people's lives. One other observation I'd make about this last one, there's a lot of subtleties and nuance in this idea of equality in the law or before the law. We have lots of laws that treat people differently, particular ones that try to pick out oppressed versus non-oppressed in our current regime. That's like the central organizing theme of a lot of political programs, to assume that one group is oppressing the other and that the job of government is to deliver the oppressed from the oppressor. That is not equality before the law. That's dividing people and building laws based on your sense of difference among people. And
so then if that is true, then that would be a violation of this pillar.
Yes.
And would therefore limit to some extent how rapidly the the people as a whole, as individuals, their prosperity, or at the state level. So, for example, in Tennessee, I'm going to compare Tennessee and California because I've studied it a lot. In Tennessee, we have no income tax on income. We have no tax on interest and dividends. We have no tax on capital gains.
Income, you mean wage income?
Wage income.
Okay. And then none on dividends?
No tax on dividends.
Yes.
No tax on interest. No tax on estates. And no tax on capital gains. And so if you're an individual here in Tennessee, no matter how much money you earn, the state is not going to tax any of it. What it does do is if you spend money in Tennessee, the state collects a sales tax.
And there's a property tax that's
and
by
the
local
state,
government.
The state,
Yes.
state lives primarily on the sales tax.
Yes.
Local governments get a share of the sales tax, and they get all of the property tax.
Right.
And so and those are both extremely broad-based taxes. And because they're very broad-based, it is difficult, regardless of which political party is in power, it is difficult to raise those taxes without upsetting the voters.
Because everybody participates in that burden.
Exactly. And so that gets in. So that's a tax question, but also gets to how people are treated equally.
Yes.
And so that's why I say that you can treat people equally under a law that taxes some people at a much higher rate than others and still say, well, that's equal. But it really isn't equal. It's where the laws are designed to treat people equally. And so
I'll just add this: one aspect of this taxation is the burden of reporting and filling out the forms. You know, that's an aspect of low regulation. We don't have to fill out any of those forms.
Right.
There's no income tax return every year. There's no estate tax return. You just don't have to do it. So not only do you save the money, you save the effort and time it would take to report it all.
Right. And we pay our state taxes when we buy things. The sales tax is added to what you're buying, and you pay it, and you're done with it. There's no third party involvement, and you just pay it.
Right.
And they then collect it. And I think that retail businesses get to keep like 1% or 2%. I don't mean of the total. I mean of the total sales tax. So if they're gonna hand in $100,000 of sales taxes that they've collected, they get to keep some smidgen of that. Take care of the accounting that they had. So it really is designed to try to limit the amount that the Tennessee state government can spend because we have to balance our budget. Now I'm going to compare that to California. California is the highest tax state in the country on a whole bunch of different levels. Our sales tax is higher. Our sales tax rate in Tennessee is higher than California.
It's 9.5%.
Yes. Yeah, and California's is not 9.5%. It's not that high. But their total income tax, their top marginal tax rate, when all is included, is about 15%. And their property taxes are now, they've broken away from that proposition. So their property taxes now are higher.
So there was a proposition that lowered them for a while?
Well, it kept them in check.
Okay.
Proposition, I think it was called Proposition, I want to say 13, but it was Howard Jarvis was the guy that passed it, and this was back over 30 years ago.
Yes.
And it limited the state's ability to raise property taxes.
So they since have broken their way out of those limits, is what I hear you saying.
Correct. And so California is a very, very high tax state. It's a very, very regulated state. It also is among the top 3 states in the country in affordability. It's a very expensive. When I say it's unaffordable,
in lack of affordability.
Lack of affordability. And so it's interesting how politicians, they talk about affordability, and so say I'm all in favor of affordability. I want people to be more prosperous. So the question is, how do you do that? What kind of policies generate more prosperity? And these are the five things to look at. And so if you have states that have low taxes, or if the federal government is lowering tax rates on and this is on capital, and remember, time is a form of capital. So if they lower taxes on capital gains, then that's going to increase the amount of money that's invested in private industry, and that is generally speaking, that increases the level of prosperity for society as a whole. And so if, at the national level, if you lower taxes on capital gains, then you're going to increase the amount of capital gains. If you lower the amount of taxes on earned income, then people are going to work longer because you've taken away the barriers to say I don't want to work much harder if I have to pay 70% of it to the government.
Right.
And right now, depending on what state you're in the 50% tax bracket if you count the federal and state on the marginal basis.
And you're speaking of the marginal tax bracket,
Yes.
which is what you pay on the last dollar of income.
Right.
The overall tax may be 20 or 30%, but the marginal tax rate might be 50. It has been in the country's history as high as 90.
Right, 94.
94.
94 was the top.
Okay.
And as early as recently as 1980, it was 70% at a very low level. At $59,000 of income in 1980, for an individual, they were in the 70% tax bracket.
Marginal tax bracket.
Marginal tax bracket, and that was after Social Security and Medicare, which also they had to take out. So they were paying about 80 cents of every dollar that they earned. Well, you can't get ahead,
Right.
especially when you have inflation
Right.
of any amount. Your earnings have to skyrocket in order just to keep up with inflation because 80 cents of every dollar that you earn goes back to the government. So at any rate, when we look at is our economy, because we look at the stock market. We've talked about investing in the stock market, investing in real estate.
Finish your question. When we look at is our economy,
when we look at when we're trying to determine how we should invest our capital. If the policies are moving in the right direction on these 5 things, and it doesn't necessarily have to be that they're moving in the right direction on all 5, but on balance they're moving in the right direction, then there's a good chance that the stock market is going to be going up over that period of time, and so it's wise to invest. But if on balance these things are going in the opposite direction, then and we can see this over time.
and by that you mean taxes are getting higher,
If taxes are
regulations
getting higher,
more complicated.
Yeah, if there's more corruption in
Corruption is
government,
increasing.
if the money becomes less sound, meaning that there's inflation, uncertainty as to the value of the dollar, and then this last one is even becoming more and more important, is if the laws are designed to treat people equally or designed to treat people differently. And I want to give you a really good example. And this is something I only thought about recently and looked it up, and that is that if you work in Congress, you can put $8,000 a year in an IRA, in a 401k, and that is out of your salary, which is taxpayer money, and then the government will match that. So a person in Congress is able to add $16,000 a year to a 401k. So if they're in Congress for 10 or 15 years, when they leave Congress, that 401k is going to be worth at least hundreds of thousands of dollars. And if they leave Congress when they're 50, by the time they're 65, that 401k is worth millions of dollars.
So how is this different from a private employer matching one for one what you put into a 401k?
I'm going to get to that in just a second, and I'm not comparing it to that.
Okay.
What I'm saying is that these public officials recognize that it's in their own interest to have a private investment account in their name that is funded by the taxpayers.
Okay.
Okay. Now, in their case, it's their employer,
Right.
but the key thing is that it's tax deferred. It's very tax advantaged, and I'm not opposed to that.
Right.
But what I am opposed to is the way that they view Social Security. Because what these very same elected people do is they say, I need to have, for my long-term well-being, I need to have a 401k that's in my name, and the money accrues in my name.
And I own it.
And I own it, and when I pass away, all of that money goes to my children. Okay?
Or wherever you designate, it's up to you 100%.
It is your money. But these very same elected officials will not allow average people who are now paying a total of 16%, and actually it's closer to 17% now if you take the employer and employee half. They're paying 17% of their wages in Social Security or Medicare for a promise that may or may not be kept sometime in the future. And I want to compare that because if you have a two-income family and two people are making $50,000, that's $100,000 total. The amount of money based on their income that's going to Social Security and Medicare is $17,000.
We went into this pretty extensensively in the last podcast and how systematic it is.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that we see polls where Americans, generally speaking, they don't have a positive outlook about the future. And what I'm trying to get at here, Michael, is okay. The American, and I'm ambivalent about the future. In other words, I don't have a strong opinion whether I think it's going to be better or worse. I know what policies need to be in place for it to be better, and I don't know whether or not those policies will be in place. And if the opposite of those policies are in place, it's going to be worse.
Yeah.
So what I'm doing is I'm talking about a very specific policy, which is long-term savings, and how politicians do not want the average person to have a private savings account, but to force them to have a substantial 17% taken out of their pay right off the top to pay for a promise that they may or may not get in 40 years. And I find that to be not only bad policy, but unjust and immoral when the very same people who
do otherwise
for themselves. And that's why this fifth one, when I was talking about equal treatment under the law allows for this inequality. And so that doesn't mean that people are being treated properly on the law, because this law is not designed to treat people equally. It's designed to treat people differently.
Yes.
And I mean completely differently.
Mm-hmm.
One is you're not going to get to save money in your own name. And the other is, and I'm going to make that so you can't do it, but I get to. And so that gets into corruption at some intellectual level. It gets into taxes at some level. It gets into sensible regulations, because now we get into health care. And we get into retirement.
Another broad theme that I'm reading as we talk about this is this taken together basically means you're not free. Things are done for you, and you don't have any control over it, and that's the formula for hopelessness.
Yes, and this is
anxiety, and I think we're having a lot of those kind of disorders now, where people think, I can't do anything about that. I give up.
Right. Exactly, and that's right on. It's you've hit right on kind of what I'm. So when we're trying to help people understand how to become prosperous, it doesn't change what we said earlier about if you are working in a company that has a 401k, absolutely take advantage of that 401k to the maximum amount possible.
Right.
We also talked about dollar cost averaging, meaning continue to invest in the markets, because when there is bad public policy, the stock market falls.
And you buy more for your money.
And then you get to buy more for your money.
So you keep investing, good or bad, in rain or shine, and the cost averages out.
Yes.
Is the point of that.
Yes, and your personal wealth will go up over a long period of time. But that doesn't mean that general prosperity will go up over a long period of time.
Right.
And that's when the very people who pass the unequal laws then have to figure out, well, now the government has gotten to be so big and the economy has gone into recession, and we don't have enough money to pay for the big government that we
have promised,
and we've promised the people in government that we're going to keep them. So now they have to find ways to tax.
Well, let's talk about a specific example this week in the news, and that's the mayor of New York has threatened the governor of New York to say, if you don't raise income taxes, I'm going to raise property taxes in New York.
Right. But what is his premise? This gets into everything we're talking about, and that's why, Michael, I want to keep talking about our pillars. So then, when we talk about the individual stories, what you and I call the data points, to try to understand: are we heading in the right direction? Are we heading in the wrong direction? If you're living in New York, they're heading in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
Okay, they're heading in the
You're
wrong
becoming
direction,
less free fairly rapidly there.
and all these things are going. All these things are going in the wrong direction. The needle's moving in the
Those are the
negative
ways
direction.
in which you're becoming less free.
Right, and less prosperous.
Yes.
And so what Mamdani has said is that essentially what he has said without saying it. But essentially what he's saying is there is no way to cut spending.
Yeah.
For New
he
York
says
City.
he has no choice but to raise property
I
taxes.
must raise taxes because I cannot cut spending. But he'll say right before that, he'll say the previous administration wasted billions of dollars. Well, that should mean I can now save billions of dollars. But he doesn't.
Right.
He said they've wasted billions of dollars, and now I'm saddled with having to continue to fund all that waste. That's essentially what he is saying.
That's the logical implication of it.
Yeah. And so now Mamdani is now saying, because he's got a short term, Kathy Hochul has an election in November.
The governor, yes.
The governor, yes. And she has promised not to raise taxes, not to raise marginal tax rates, because that might cost her the election.
Right.
So she might be telling members of the party,
just wait till after the election.
just wait till after the election, and then I'll raise them.
What was that famous conversation that was caught on mic? I think it was Obama and maybe it was Putin. Said, wait till after the election when I'll have more flexibility.
Yeah. Yes. That was our foreign policy issue.
Yes.
And so I have to appear to be strong now.
Right.
But just give me a few months and we'll wink, nod, nod.
Right.
But in this case, what Mamdani is saying is he's got a short-term problem. He can't wait until after November. His budget comes up in June.
Yeah.
So he's got 90 days here where he has to do one of three things. He either has to cut spending, and the people who elected him are the pro-government people. Those are the ones who elected him. So those are his actual real constituents. And that's now becoming abundantly clear because he's saying, I'm not cutting spending. Therefore, and I have a huge deficit. Therefore, I must find revenue. And I'm either going to raise property taxes, and I'm telling Hochul, the governor, who's of the same political party, that either you're going to raise income taxes, let me raise income taxes, or I'm going to raise property taxes. Now,
let me say at the end of the last podcast, we talked about this following up by contrasting public versus private principles here, what works in a private economy as opposed to a government-compelled economy. And when you said he's got to raise money, there is a compulsion there that is not present in private markets. As a business people, you and I've got to have more money for my business. I'm losing money, and we've got to fix it. Well, I can't just say you've got to pay me more, customer.
right,
Because the customer doesn't have to buy my product.
right,
A citizen has to pay his taxes.
yeah,
So there's a level of compulsion, of coercion, of force in the public sector that is not present in the private sector. In the end, if you don't give something to your customer worth more than you're asking him to pay, you will go out of business.
I call that, Michael, a natural constraint.
Yes.
And government doesn't have natural constraints.
Yes.
I'm now going to correct myself because I'm going to go back we bring up Tennessee a lot because we live here and we're very familiar with Tennessee and its history.
Yes.
If you go back into the 80s, the Democrat Party controlled the House, controlled the Senate, and for the most part, they also controlled the governor's office. And so they could do whatever they wanted to under the state constitution. And our state constitution had two significant constraints. One was there could be no tax on earned income.
Yes.
And the other was they had to balance the budget every year. And so even though Democrats wanted to spend more money, and the Democrat Party is much more in Tennessee the party of government than the Republican Party is, but they couldn't figure out how to collect more revenue unless they could impose an income tax. And they spent 15 years trying to claim that the Constitution did not say what it clearly said. And they kept saying over and over and over again, well, it doesn't matter what it says, it's different now. That would be what they say. And they would get lawyers who would say, that's correct. They would get former judges who would say, that's correct. The media would beat the drumbeat over a constant effort. But that still didn't mean that the public wanted or would abide by an income tax.
Right.
So that was the 15 years of claiming we have to have more money, or the sky is going to fall. Everything is going to collapse. And it got right up to a vote in 1999 in the State House, and it didn't pass because there were a few Democrats, I don't remember their names, there were a few Democrats who tricked the Democrat Speaker of the House.
Oh, this is a great story.
And they promised that they would vote for the income tax as long as their individual vote was the vote that put it over the top. In other words, decided it. And they told him, his name was Jimmy Nafee. And Jimmy Nafee was a
Speaker of the House.
Speaker of the
Nafee,
House.
Yeah.
He was a very tough guy.
Yes.
And I didn't like his policy. He came on the radio show a lot, Teddy Bart Roundtable.
He was a brass knuckle politician.
Very tough, very
tough
tough
guy. Yeah.
But the one thing about him was he was honest.
Yes.
And he and he'd come on there, and we would have honest debates about policy. And I always enjoyed it when he came on the show. He wasn't into name calling. He was about public policy, and we just disagreed.
Right.
But he was honest about it, and he was honest when he wanted an income tax. He was also a brass knucks. So if he wanted something, and you were a Democrat in the House, he was going to get it. So now this vote was coming up, and there were 5 Democrats in the House, and they said in their own words to him, they agreed to this. Nobody knew about this until after the fact. But they told him in their own words, Jimmy, I will vote for a state income tax as long as my vote is the deciding vote. Because as soon as I vote yes, I'm going to lose my next election. Because my voters will throw me out.
Right.
I will do that because of my loyalty to you.
If it makes it succeed.
But
I'm not going to run out there and commit to that. I'm not thrown out of office and then have it not pass.
Right. So he thought he had 5 yeses.
Yes.
And he had 5 abstentions. He had 5 votes, not yes votes. They weren't no votes, but he had to have 5 yes votes. And he thought he had all of them, and he had none of them. So when he called for the vote, and all these Democrats who thought it was going to pass, they went and voted yes, even though for years they had been telling their constituents that they would never vote for a state income tax. But now that it was going to pass, they voted yes. And then these 5, they literally ran to the 4 corners of the chamber, and one stood in the middle. And Jimmy Nafee held that vote open for 3 hours. And he ran around trying to get those 5 people to come together physically in one spot, and they wouldn't budge. And after 3 hours, Jimmy Nafee realized that he had been had.
Yeah.
And it didn't pass.
Right.
And then Democrats started losing elections because now they'd been exposed that they were, in fact, for an income tax. Now, what's interesting is this. That was a Republican governor.
I remember.
Who tried to help, Don Sundquist. And Don Sundquist was in his second term, so he had nothing to lose politically because he couldn't run for a third. The next governor was Governor Phil Bredesen, who had been the mayor of Nashville. Phil Bredesen may have been one of the best mayors of any city in the entire country.
Yes, and he was a Democrat.
And he was a Democrat, and he did he was a fabulous mayor.
Right. And
then as governor, he was a really good governor.
Right.
Really good governor.
Right.
And we had a thing called TennCare, which was the precursor to Obamacare, and it was a mess. It had been passed by Governor McWhorter before Sundquist. Sundquist then couldn't figure out in his 8 years how to reform it. He knew it was a mess, but his solution was more taxes. Bredesen was a very smart healthcare executive. And so when he comes in as a Democrat, as governor, he knows how to fix it, and he does. And so Tennessee then Republicans took over the House and took over the Senate. And the Speaker of the House.
And by the way, he fixed it by scaling back the benefits.
Yes.
It was a huge magnet for people to come from other states.
And the fraud was astounding. The amount of fraud because of the way the program was designed. And he saw that. He knew it. In Tennessee, just to give you an example, Tennessee issued more prescriptions. It issued 2 times more prescriptions than the second highest subscription per capita state in the country. 2 times the second one.
Because it's too bad that Minnesota and California didn't call him before they got into their mess.
Well, they probably were watching, and so what happened, and figuring out that's a good way to, and so what happened was, and this was especially true with the OxyContin type drugs,
right?
And those are, I think, a form of narcotics, are certainly addictive, and under TennCare you could get a 30 count bottle for $1. Under TennCare. And so what people were doing was they were because you could sell the individual pills for $10.
Right.
And so each bottle was worth $300, but you'd only have to pay $1. And so there were drug dealers and things coming in from all over the country. And it was a disaster, and Bredesen fixed it.
Yeah.
And then Republicans took over the House, and we did have a tax on interest and dividends, but not earned income. We did away with that. A lady named Beth Harwell was our Speaker of the House. Did away with that. We did away with the capital gain, the estate tax, and then we fixed our workman's comp. We had a problem there, and we had tort reform. And so Tennessee moved from being a mediocre state in terms of places to do business and places to work to one of the very best places in the country. And as a result of that, Tennessee has been growing very, very rapidly in population. And the population, the people who are moving here to take advantage of the work environment.
Yes.
So they're not moving here to take advantage of our welfare benefits,
right?
Which is the opposite of states like New York and California,
right?
And so when we talk about these five pillars. It's important to compare them, use the states, because some states that are going in the wrong direction, they have economic problems in their states that are now affecting the economy of their states. And so in some states, for example, the office market is doing very badly, and that means the office buildings, the value of office buildings and commercial real estate in general in those states is declining. Well, that's bad for the economy of those states. There are people who say, well, I don't own any of those buildings, so it's not affecting me. Well, it actually is affecting them in an indirect way, and it's making their life the affordability issues are becoming more and more difficult. And so you have states like California, Oregon, Washington, Illinois that are now in the process of imposing wealth taxes. So that if you have a lot of money, they're just going to take some of it. And then if people leave, which they will, if people leave those states to go to other states, then there's fewer people in that class to take money from. But they still have to fund the massive government that they've promised to fund.
Well, I would challenge the tense that you used there, that they will leave. They are leaving, and they have left.
That's a fair point.
Yeah,
and
we've
more,
already seen in California in the last 3 months.
Right, and more are planning to leave.
Yes,
and if that ballot initiative is turned in with enough signatures. Then there'll be a gap of about 90 days to 120 days where more can leave, because if the initiative passes, the taxes immediately due. And so what you're seeing is that once again, we're talking about when people are trying to get a sense of which way is the economy going to go, look at these 5 pillars. If the national economy is moving in the right direction on these 5 pillars, if the national government is moving in the right direction, then that is a good thing. If an individual state is moving in the wrong direction, then that's certainly bad for the people within the state, and that is not good for the country as a whole. But it's more isolated to that problem. And so let's look at as we're looking at this thing, when Trump gets reelected, one of the things he campaigned on was he said, I'm going to make the 2017 tax cuts permanent. And those 2017 tax cuts reduced taxes in 2017 on everybody, including the rich. But everybody got a tax cut. And so by making that permanent, those taxes now, unless Congress changes the rates, those taxes are now permanently lower.
Yes, and when they passed it in 2017, the way the budget rules work, they have to calculate the total amount of money involved, and they sunset these things, and they pretend that the tax is going to go up, which it was scheduled to do in 2026.
Correct.
Right. So
Yes.
so they actually didn't cut taxes. They voted to leave them where they were. So they cut from where they were planned by law were going to be required to go.
Well, we'll go back to where they were. They
Yes.
would revert to where they were.
Yeah. So it was a cut against what was coming, but it was status quo against what was in place.
Right.
Yeah.
But then in addition to that, Trump did pass additional tax cuts on tips, on
Social
overtime,
Security income?
and on Social Security. And that
He
just
exempted them.
exempted
from
Social
tax.
Security income. And so now people who work for tips, and they're about to see this, that because the way the law worked was that it didn't change the withholding in 2025.
Right.
But the tax break was effective the beginning of 2025.
Yes.
And so people paid more into their taxes. They paid more in taxes.
Their withholding should be less onerous now. So they are seeing it, right?
Well, they're getting a refund. They're now getting a refund for the over withholding in 2025. They will get a refund in March and April.
Okay.
And it will be much larger than they expect it to be.
Okay.
And so there will be billions of dollars that flow into the economy in March and April that come from these tax refunds. In addition to that, in 26, the withholding is lower. And so it's a double. There'll be a double effect for 1 year.
Right.
In a positive way for the economy, which is partly why the stock market has done very well over the last 9 months. When Trump got in and he cut these taxes, he also imposed a lot of tariffs, and there was a lot of people were scared that the tariffs were going to crater the economy because they always referred to 1929 when the Smoot-Hawley tariffs were passed. And we had the Depression.
Right.
Now, we did have the history, and we ought to have a podcast sometime on the history of the Depression.
Okay.
Because if tariffs automatically cause a depression, which was the claim, if they automatically cause a depression, then we should be in a depression now. Because Trump dramatically increased tariffs, but we didn't go into a depression, which means that this notion that tariffs automatically result in something terrible, it turns out that's not true.
So do you think that the tariffs of the Smoot-Hawley tariffs, I think they were named, of around 1928 or 30, that it was just before the Depression,
Right.
Do you think that those caused or substantially caused the Depression? Or are you now saying you don't think that was the cause then and we're not having a depression now?
I'm going to answer your question in a short answer.
Very good.
Say we need to have a podcast for the long answer.
Okay.
The short answer is this: the Smoot-Hawley tariffs were significant, and they triggered a drop in the stock. They triggered a drop in the stock market. At that time, many of the people who played in the stock market were on margin, and what that means is that they bought a stock for $1 by putting up a dime. Okay?
Right.
So
they borrowed the other 90 cents.
So they borrowed the other 90 cents. But then if the stock fell 10%, then it wiped out the ownership. And now the person who was lending the money said, I need my money back.
Right.
And so what that did was that caused a stampede to the exits to sell stocks, not because of the tariffs, which were a trigger, but it caused the market to collapse because of the margin calls. Okay,
and the more people sold, the lower the price was.
And it cascaded.
Yes.
And so that's what caused the depression in the stock market.
Okay.
Now, that then caused a whole bunch of bad things in the economy in the short term. But what caused the depression to last as long as it did was that the Roosevelt administration, when they took office, the top marginal tax rate was 25%. By the time he died, it was 94%. So people who were trying to earn their way out of the depression
had a steeper and steeper.
Well,
they
couldn't do it. It wasn't just steeper; they couldn't do it. I mean, it was like trying to climb a mountain that's reversed. I mean, you can't do it.
Well, by the time it gets to 94, it's just impossible.
And the average person got to 50% very early in the 30s.
Yeah.
So we ended up with another depression in 37, 38. And so we can talk about that whole thing because that's a very interesting period, and it's a good period to understand so that when people say, well, in 1929, the tariffs caused a depression, the tariffs certainly triggered a stock market decline. It certainly did that.
There's a general thing I'd like to say here. This is very interesting to me because we are taught that effects have causes. We've touched on this before in podcasts, and I think we are very much under-taught about probability, and that sometimes you can make a good decision and get a bad outcome, and sometimes you can make a bad decision and get a good outcome. That's not too tough to kind of take in and agree with, right? But it violates the idea of cause and effect. And there's multiple causes, and there's not a unitary effect. There's a probability that it will have a certain effect, but a possibility that it won't.
Well, and the other thing is, I mean, and along that same line of thinking, is that you have simple problems and you have complex problems. A simple problem is B is the problem is caused by A. If you fix A, you fix B.
Right.
A complex problem is D is the problem, which is caused by C, which is caused by B, which is caused by A. And if you say D is the problem and I'm going to solve C, and you don't solve what caused C, then you haven't solved anything. And this is what we're talking about here is one thing triggered an event that then caused something else. But the long-term nature of what is considered the major problem, being the depression, was a different thing altogether.
Yeah,
which nobody talks about, or very few people do.
The abstract nature of this conversation we're having reminds me. I heard once that there are two types of people in the world. There are those who divide people into two types, and those who don't.
Very clever.
All right.
Very clever. Yeah. So let's go back, and let's go back to Mamdani as an example.
Right.
You have Mamdani who has said, I'm either going to raise taxes 9.5%, or Kathy Hochul is going to increase, or unless Kathy Hochul increases income taxes. Is either one of those things good for the people of New York City?
Well, number one on our list was low taxes.
Yeah.
Those seem to be going the opposite direction, don't they? Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're going to raise taxes and you say I'm trying to make things more affordable, and you do things that weaken the economy, then you're not going to end up making things more affordable, which we said earlier is the pillars of prosperity.
Well, one way of looking at this is you're raising prices, basically raising the price of government.
Well, sure.
And claiming that it's going to make things more affordable.
Well, you're raising the cost.
You're raising the price that you're charging the taxpayer.
Yes. That's
what I mean by raising the price.
But you're forcing them to pay. Yeah. Unlike your example of in a business, if you do it, the consumer might not
walk away.
Now you're not letting them walk away.
You can't.
But if you can't walk away, but you also can't pay it, then what happens? And that's where in New York City you have billions and billions of dollars. I mean, hundreds of billions of dollars of commercial office buildings, and a 9.5% increase on taxes on those office building owners if they don't have the tenants in the building to pay the mortgages on the property. What do? They
default.
They hand the keys. They hand the keys to the lender.
Right.
Okay. Well, what does that do to the property taxes? What does that do to the value of the building? Because property taxes are based on the value of the building.
Right.
So if the value of the building goes down 50%, and you've raised taxes 9.5%, now you're taxing something that's a whole lot less valuable. And so what Mamdani doesn't. He simply doesn't understand this. I think Mamdani was born with a pretty good brain. But that doesn't mean that if you have a pretty good brain that you understand how things cause and effect and how things work. And I think he has this view of the world that sounds nice in a speech, but it doesn't work in reality. And
well, as we've said many times, people believe what they wish to be true, and I'm sure he would like the world to work that way.
Yeah. And there are a lot of people who wished it worked that way because once again, it's simple.
Yeah.
A causes B, but that's not how the world works. A is complex. The world is complex. It's not a simple cause and effect. And so what we'll do is we should be watching. Let's watch New York, telling our folks, let's watch New York and see if this is good policy. Does it result in more prosperity? Does it help the people of New York to raise taxes one way or the other? Does it do that? Now, on the other coast, you have Newsom, who has said, I am against the 5% tax on the wealth of people with more than $1 billion. He says that. He's the governor. What would you, if you were given a chance to ask him questions, or if you were commenting on what he says and what's going on, and also that he has presidential ambitions, how would you kind of think about that?
How would I think about what I would ask him?
Yeah, what would you ask him? What would you ask him?
Well, the first question that comes to mind is, do you think that tax is going to raise more money or lose money?
Okay, that's a fair question.
Because if people leave, then they lose what they were already collecting from them.
Okay, and let's say he says, I think on balance it'll lose money, which is why I'm against it. How would you then follow
against
up?
The asset tax?
He is against it. He says, I don't think it's a good idea.
Yeah.
Okay, what would you then ask?
You tell me.
Well, I would say, well, you're the leader of the Democrat Party in California. It's the Democrat Party that's trying to get the referendum on the ballot. Why don't you show some leadership
and stop it?
If you want to run for president and you can't even lead your own party, how in the world can you lead the country? Because I think he's only saying he's against it
to set himself apart.
And that gets back to integrity. That gets back to a lot of our other things. Corruption. Corruption can take many forms.
Yeah. That really, I was going to say earlier that aligns with virtue and character and integrity.
Corruption has a lot of subtitles. Yeah. So anyway, and then you have in Oregon, we talked about this, I think last week or the week before, there's now going to be a ballot initiative to repeal some taxes in Oregon. Well, if those taxes are repealed, then the government in Oregon is actually going to have to shrink because they're raising the taxes to pay for the bigger government.
Right.
And they passed those taxes.
Right.
And now the voters might very well repeal those taxes.
Right.
And so then the government will actually, the people who are elected will then not have the revenue that they need. And so it'll be interesting to see then how they react.
Well, they will shriek. There's a lot of people there that will shriek. And, the irony to me is this happens in the private sector all the time.
Yes.
Businesses hit these kind of walls.
Washington Post just had the story where they had to lay off a third of their employees.
Right.
And
there's a lot of people that think that the owner should just continue to lose, was it $300 million a year? Because it's
$100 million a year.
And that it would be a noble thing to just keep losing money.
Right. And those are the people who've lost their jobs and they'll now have to find work elsewhere. But Trump, since he's been president, I believe the number of federal employees has been reduced by over 300,000. Because remember, he did that buyout.
Right.
And that buyout paid people through the end of 25. So as of January, February 26, those expenses now are much lower because even though the people weren't working, they were allowed to go look for other jobs. They were still on the payroll for 6 months. That was their severance deal. So at any rate, Michael, I think we'll kind of bring this one to a close, but I want to go back and say our future podcast, low taxes, we're going to be looking at it by state, and we'll look at the federal level. Low taxes, sensible regulations. We'll talk a little bit about Trump is deregulating a lot of things, and that frees up a lot of time, it frees up a lot of capital, because complying with regulations costs money.
Yes.
And so that frees up time and capital. Low corruption. I don't know that corruption's getting any better or getting any worse. So we'll talk about that and try to identify ways of thinking about it. Sound money. Inflation is now at 2.4% over the last 12 months, which means it's under 2% in the last quarter, which means that as this year, 26, progresses, It may get down to 1%, which would be on a current basis, which would be very, very good. The key to sound money long term is going to be shrinking that deficit more, the annual deficit more and more, so that it gets down to around 3% of the total economy. Yeah. Yes, that's a manageable number, but then you have to keep it there to keep the money sound, and you have to grow the economy at 3 to 5%.
Right.
And then the last one is equal treatment under the law. That's going to be an ongoing discussion that we have, because that's where the battle is going on right now, and that includes even like the SAVE Act, because how people are treated under the voting laws applies to what we're talking about. Right. So we'll be talking about those things.
Whether you have to show an ID or not.
Right, and whether or not that's a good idea or a bad idea,
right,
and what constitutes a good idea and a bad idea, because it depends on what you want the result, what you want the elections to accomplish in terms of fairness and participation.
Yes.
Those are the two things you want.
Right,
you want people to be able to vote easily. In Tennessee, the slogan is, we want it to be easy to vote and hard to cheat.
Yeah.
And so those are what our laws are. And we'll be talking about those things in the coming weeks. Thank you. Yeah.